Tonight, when the temperature drops, you will reach for something: a blanket, a heater, a warm drink. You will do it without thinking. You will do it in seconds. But for the first 2 million years of your existence, that option did not exist. There was no switch, there was no flame. There was only the dark, the cold, and your naked, trembling body trying to survive until morning. This is the story of what your ancestors actually did before fire, and the answer is stranger and more impressive than you have ever been told. Most people assume fire was always part of the human story, that it was there from the beginning, crackling in the cave, keeping the night at bay. But the earliest controlled use of fire by human ancestors only appears in the fossil record around 1 million years ago. Some scientists push it to 400,000 years. The species that became you had already been walking upright, making tools, and surviving brutal Ice Age winters for over 1 million years before anyone figured out how to reliably make a flame. Your ancestors did not discover fire and then spread across the Earth. They spread across the Earth first, and somehow, impossibly, they survived. So what did they actually do? Your body holds the first clue. You are, compared to most large mammals, embarrassingly underfed in the cold. You have almost no fur. You cannot hibernate. You sweat rather than pant, which is brilliant in the heat and nearly useless in a snowstorm. And yet your ancestors colonized northern Europe, the Siberian steppe, and mountainous terrain in conditions that would hospitalize you in hours today. Researcher Leslie Aiello and her colleague Peter Wheeler proposed what is now called the expensive tissue hypothesis. The argument goes like this. At some point in your evolutionary history, your ancestors began eating more calorie-dense food. That food allowed the gut to shrink, and the energy freed up from running a smaller digestive system was redirected to the brain, more problem-solving, more survival. Before fire, that calorie-dense food was raw meat. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham spent decades studying this question and concluded that cooking was the turning point that made modern humans possible. But his research also reveals the flip side. Before cooking existed, your ancestors were eating raw animal tissue, a bone marrow cracked open with stones, and organs rich in fat. They were not vegetarians foraging peacefully in meadows. They were aggressive scavengers and increasingly skilled hunters who prioritized fat and protein above everything else. And that diet, as brutal as it sounds, fueled the brain that would eventually figure out fire. But food only solves part of the problem. What about the cold? When the sun went down in the Pleistocene, temperatures in many parts of the world did not just drop. They plummeted. And without fire, your ancestors had to work with what they had. The first strategy was simple. Pile on. Not clothing in any modern sense, but animal hides. Scraped, cured to some degree, and layered. Archaeological evidence from sites like Schöningen in Germany and Atapuerca in Spain shows that early hominins were processing animal skins hundreds of thousands of years before fire became common. They were not just eating the animals they hunted, they were wearing them. Thick fur from bear, bison, and horse wrapped around the body creates a dead air insulation layer that still rivals modern synthetic materials. Your ancestors understood this empirically, without a single word of science. The second strategy was community. Researcher Robin Dunbar, famous for his work on social group sizes in early humans, has argued that one of the core evolutionary pressures shaping the human brain was the need to manage large, complex social bonds. And one of the most important practical functions of those bonds was warmth. Bodies pressed together in a sheltered space generate and retain heat in ways that single individuals simply cannot. Your ancestors slept piled together. Not just couples or family units, but entire bands of 15 to 30 individuals, bodies overlapping in rock shelters and shallow caves, sharing heat the way you might share a blanket. There was no privacy. There was no personal space in the modern sense. There was only survival, and survival required skin-to-skin contact in the dark. The third strategy was shelter itself, and this is where it gets remarkable. Before permanent stone shelters, before anything recognizable as architecture, your ancestors were building temporary windbreaks and sleeping structures from branches, leaves, and stone. Evidence found at the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania by archaeologist Mary Leakey in the 1950s suggests that hominins as far back as 1.8 million years ago may have arranged stones in rough circles, possibly as the base weight for branch and leaf shelters. These were not houses, but they were intentional. They demonstrate that the brain, even then, was calculating the geometry of protection. Where does the wind come from? How do I block it? What materials hold heat? And then there is the most surprising adaptation of all. Your body itself changed. Paleoclimatologist Axel Timmerman and his colleagues have modeled how early human populations tracked and adapted to shifting climate zones over deep time. What emerges is a picture of a species that did not simply endure cold environments. It physiologically adapted to them. Shorter limbs conserve heat. Wider nasal passages warm air before it reaches the lungs. Higher basal metabolic rates generate more internal heat. Many of these adaptations appear in the fossil record of populations that lived through the cold long before fire was mastered. Your ancestors were not just clever, they were physically reshaping across generations to survive a world without warmth. And yet even this misses something, because surviving the cold was only half the problem. The other half was surviving the dark. Darkness before fire was not merely an inconvenience. It was a genuine existential threat. Predators do not sleep when you sleep. Leopards, hyenas, and cave lions were not figments of prehistoric imagination. They were real animals with better night vision than you, sharper hearing, and an appetite that did not distinguish between ancient humans and any other prey animal. Researcher Polly Wiesner, an anthropologist who spent decades studying the Zhuhuanzi people of the Kalahari, documented something striking. Even today, around a fire, human social behavior shifts dramatically at night. The daylight hours are for work, conflict resolution, and practical talk. The night hours, around the fire, are for storytelling, for spiritual conversation, for the deep bonding that holds communities together. Wiesner argues that firelight extended the social day and transformed the emotional and cognitive life of our species. But before fire, that social night did not exist. When darkness came, your ancestors went still. They retreated. They piled together in the deepest, most sheltered part of whatever space they had found. And they waited. They listened. They slept in short, alert cycles. Researcher Jerome Siegel, who studied sleep patterns in modern hunter-gatherer communities with no artificial light, found that people without electricity do not simply sleep longer. They sleep differently. They wake during the night. They lie still in a kind of quiet alertness before sleeping again. This pattern, which feels like insomnia to modern humans, may in fact be the ancestral default. Your body remembers the dark even if your mind has forgotten it. This is what the world before fire actually looked like. Not romantic, not savage in the cartoon sense, but deeply ingeniously adapted. Your ancestors were problem solvers without the most basic tool that we take for granted. They wore what they killed. They slept pressed against each other for warmth. They built windbreaks from branches. Their bodies changed across generations to generate more heat and lose less of it. And in the dark, they were still. They were quiet. They were alert in the way that only something that knows it is prey can be. And then, somewhere around 1 million years ago, someone held a spark. Maybe it was accidental. A struck stone, a dry branch near a lightning-struck tree. We do not know the first moment. We only know what came after. Cooked food, longer social evenings, faster brain development. The slow, irreversible transformation of a species that was already extraordinary into the one that would eventually cover the entire planet. You reach for warmth without thinking tonight. That reflex is not laziness, it is memory. It is 2 million years of your ancestors doing exactly the same thing, with nothing but their bodies, each other, and the cold dark pressing in from every direction. The fire changed everything. But the world before fire made you.